Hello, everybody. Welcome and thank you all so much for joining us this beautiful Sunday morning. Sunny morning. I wish it was Sunday still. For this professional webinar, it's entitled Effective Approaches to Addressing Aggressive Behaviors. My name is Catherine, and I am your community engagement liaison, and I have the privilege of introducing our incredible presenters with Adopt for Life, a not-for-profit charitable organization that provides peer support, community education, advocacy, and awareness to adoption, permanency, kinship, customary care, and other communities across Ontario and beyond. We are so very honored to have so many of you join us today, both within Canada as well as internationally, as we learned evidence-based approaches and evidence-based and practice-informed approaches to building capacity within families and their safety. Now, before I sort of share how we are going to be using this platform, I would like to take pause and acknowledge the lands that we are situated on today. Now, I do understand that we are coming from various places from around the world, so I ask that you take the time to really reflect on your own personal territory and treaty. I personally reside in the territory of Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and Mississauga of the Credits people within Treaty 19, now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and our understanding and responsibility in improving relationships between nations. And as the first step towards improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures, to recognize and acknowledge the historic and ongoing devastating effects of colonialism and racism in the name of assimilation across Canada, and to consider how we each can, in our own way, action forward in a spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. As long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the river flows. We really want this to be an engaging and interactive webinar, so please feel free to use the chat feature for any sort of tech-related issues, to share any comments or engage in the content that our presenters will be sharing. We also would love to know where you're logging in from, so please feel free to jot down the city in the comments as I continue our sort of introduction here. We invite you to use your closed captioning feature if you would like to enhance your understanding of the audio content to accommodate any needs that you may have. If you do have specific questions for the AFCCA support team, we do ask for you to use that in the Q&A feature on this webinar. I think we're all Zoom professionals at this point. So by using the Q&A feature, you do have the option of asking anonymously if this is what you prefer. Please note that due to the number of participants, we may not be able to answer all of the questions live. However, we will be following up with a copy of this recording, as well as any other relevant materials, and we will also be able to answer any questions that you may have after the webinar. If you're watching this as a recording, please know that you are also more than welcome to ask questions. So you can always email us at afcasupport@adoptforlife.com, and I'll make sure I leave that email in the comments as well. At the end of this presentation, you will receive a short survey. So we would very much appreciate if you can take a few minutes to fill out the survey, and this really shapes the work that the AFCCA team does and will help support future topics and resources that will be available. This is also going to be emailed to you with a copy of this presentation after the fact. Okay, that's a lot of me talking. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our two presenters this morning. In no particular order, first we have Maude, and Maude is our AFCCA clinical lead. She brings vast clinical research and personal experience to Adopt for Life. A mother of 5 through both birth and adoption, with expertise in neuroscience. She specializes in fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, trauma, and AFCA. She's also a registered social worker and psychotherapist, holding an MSW and pursuing her PhD at Queen's University. Maude, last time I called you a
physiotherapist.
physiotherapist, so I'm proud of myself.
That was enough schooling for me. I don't need a physiotherapy degree.
I feel like every time I'm just going to put something else in there just to see
Yeah,
what,
you could. Why not?
just add it to the vast things that's going on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the 5 kids is like, that's enough, you know?
Then I just take a pause. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine five. Okay, so Tanya is a psychotherapist and she specializes in early childhood trauma, attachment, complexities, FASD, and other related neurodiversities. As an adoptee, she brings empathy and understanding to her work. She's trained in DDP, polyvagal theory, and NVR, and she supports families facing AFCA in complex situations. Operating a private practice in Ottawa, she previously served as an FASD key worker in BC, aiding parents and caregivers as well as youth. She co-founded the Fetal Alcohol Resource Program, or as I know it as FARP, in the Ontario Centre for Attachment and Training Therapy. And she's also a mother of 2 young men and a stepmother.
Mm.
I didn't have anything extra to say about you because both of your resumes are incredible.
Oh,
So
someone just wrote that they're a FARPy in the conversation.
I was gonna
Welcome
say,
to
I
the
always
new
called it
FARPy.
FARP.
Maude and I were both we were both original members of the FARPy club.
Oh, the FARPies. Oh, yeah. So believe it or not, that's only like a small snippet of both of their experience. So if you are looking to like learn exactly um, what they're doing in Mo's physiotherapist background, feel free to go to adultforlife.com and you can learn more about them. All right, that's enough of me talking. I'm going to be turning off my camera. However, I am going to be in the background supporting any sort of tech related issues to the best of my ability. And I'm going to turn things over to the incredible AFCCA team.
So Maude is just going to be sharing her screen, and I really want to say welcome. And just a funny thing, I mean, we're sort of, well, Catherine introduced us, but Maude and I have been working together for a long time in various different roles. So we both actually started out as key workers in FASD, key workers in British Columbia at slightly different times in very similar areas. And then we both helped start the Fetal Alcohol Resource Program in Ottawa. We were both in private practice in the same place in Ottawa, and now we're both starting this program, the AFCCA Family Support Program. And just a little bit of information about that. We are a pilot project, and we've been going for just over a year and a half. I guess we're coming up technically to our 2nd year. And we are 1.5 clinical leads in all of Ontario. And so far, just in our population, we have identified well over 600 families. Sorry, Donna keeps putting things up. And it's funny. We have over 600 families identified as experiencing and living with AFCA in their home. So it's a really big job, and we'll kind of address a little bit of the complexity. But so the title here is Practical Strategies, and I'm I'm a little uncomfortable with the title, and I think we both are. But what we are talking about is the different approaches that we're learning that can be effective in supporting AFCA in families who are living with AFCA. So this is our team. I'll let Maude introduce a little more.
Hi, everyone. So thank you for joining us today. And I guess Tanya and I don't need further introduction, but I would say Tanya and I have very similar approaches, and we like to joke that I do what Tanya does, but with a French accent. And we have a bigger team now. So Nancy Lockwood is the practice lead, co-director of her team. She also was the director when we had the Fetal Alcohol Resource Program. So she's really helping us in getting us organized and leading it in the right direction. And then Jen Drudge, she's a parent liaison in her team, but now she's really specializing in AFCA. She supports families across the province. She's wonderful. She's leading groups with us. Adopt for Life is based on the lived experience of adoptive parents, kinship, customary care, and foster parents. So we, all of us have the personal experience of adoption to some degree. And then we had a grant recently to make sure our program is adapted to diversity. So we have the equity access clinician, Ruby Alguire, who is an MSW. She's a great clinician and also adapting her material with Elise, who's also a wealth of knowledge and really helping us making sure our program meets the needs of different communities. So I will tell you the story of how AFCCA came about. This is not a name that or an acronym that existed before. So what happened is a few years ago during COVID, I did a research with Queen's University, and looking at the lived experience of individuals with who are raising kids with FASD, and we saw that there was a really big increase in aggressive behaviors in children and youth with FASD. Again, we don't want to say that people with FASD all have aggressive behaviors. Not all of them do, but there was certainly an increase. With lack of structure, they really lost their routine, everything that kind of made life a little bit more predictable. And there was an increase in stress, mental health issues, and we also saw behaviors becoming more difficult for families. And that's when we start seeing other kind of problems in the adoption community. So we joined forces to create the first consortium on AFCCA. At the time, it was called Child to Parent Violence and Aggression. And this is the term that they were using in Europe, but they felt kind of not necessarily respectful of individuals who display aggressive behaviors. So the consultation was about how are we going to include in AFCCA? How are we going to call this? And what's the experience of parents? And why I'm sharing that, maybe it sounds like, okay, why is she sharing that story? I think it's important to understand the background, the terms that we're using. And also it's a reminder for all of us that this is a new field. We're still very much learning about this. We look like we're the expert because we're doing this full time now, but we are like as everyone like at the beginning of the journey and really understanding how to support these families, what their needs are, and no one has a magic solution. So AFCCA, aggression towards family caregivers in childhood and adolescence. I'll send you the link of the reports we wrote. There was over 100 families invested in that kind of a survey and qualitative interviews to understand their challenges. And I'll share some of the data with you. And what it described, we're not talking about like a 3-year-old who has a tantrum at the store. We're not calling this AFCCA. We're talking about a set of behaviors, a pattern of behaviors that is happening often in the family, and that puts the safety of family members at risk. And sometimes it's also happening at school or in the community. And we wanted to use AFCCA to sort of externalize the issue and not blame it on the kids or blame the family members as well. And when we're thinking about AFCCA, when we're thinking of aggression during childhood and adolescence, there's a lot of assumptions that we can make. And I would invite you in the chat to share some of those assumptions, not necessarily assumptions that you have, but assumptions that communities or society has, maybe the healthcare system, maybe it's at the school, maybe what you hear in the news. What are those assumptions when you hear that a child hits his parents or destroys, property, hits his siblings? What's the first thing that comes to mind? And feel free to write in the chat.
More children who are aggressive at school.
Yeah, like
you often see it.
Yeah, quite often parents are being blamed.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at the child, yes, it's often like there's something wrong in the parenting. Parents needs to be more strict, disciplined. Oftentimes, yes, it's the mother's fault. Often yes, this is what we hear. Could be due to childhood trauma, neglect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, coming from a broken home.
Manipulative.
Yes. yeah, maybe he's
not
managing
disciplining or over disciplining. Isn't it interesting just to bring up when it was spoken about to Doug Ford, his response was, well, you know, when it was spoken about the aggression in school, well, if I ever hit my kid, I'd go home and my mom would hit me twice as hard. And I think it really does speak to some of the complications that come, and we're going to go more and more into the whole stigma and what happens when we have those kind of assumptions.
Yes, and it's so interesting to see what people share. It's yes, they will want more diagnosis. They want medication. This is often the school asking for it, and or that they should just behave. I think one of the key aspects for me, anyway, I don't know for you, Tanya, is that as a society, we're trained to look at the child's behavior to assess parenting.
Mhm.
But when we are talking about kids who are not neurotypical, we're talking children who have been through, they have complex trauma, they have brain-based disabilities like ADHD, and sometimes it's like ADHD, FASD, autism, and sometimes it's all of the above. Like they have the alphabet soup of diagnosis. We cannot look at the child's behavior to assess parental capacity. Like the parents that we work with are extremely competent parents, lots of resources, but they have to climb the Everest, basically. They're not climbing a little mountain of parenting, they're climbing a really big mountain that needs a lot of support and understanding.
Just quick, someone just said, is FASD considered a neurodivergence? Yes, absolutely it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of new definitions on like neural disability, neurodivergent, like there's a few words, but really like FASD is a brain-based disability. You're neurologically divergent, I would say. We ask families what AFCCA look like in their home. That's during the consortium. And if you want more data, you can go on the website. It will be part of the slide that we will send you. But again, it's like most people, 76% said they were experiencing daily, weekly incidents. The intensity was quite high. And why we also felt like we needed a name as therapists, I think we thought, I think we were using the word dysregulation a lot, which is kind of like, yes, it's emotional dysregulation in most times. But when you're thinking of that, maybe it's a kid jumping on the couch, which is aggravating, but it's not dangerous. It's not life-threatening. It will not lead to trauma. But when we're thinking of AFA, we're thinking of behaviors that could lead to traumatic experiences in all family members and sometimes outside the home. And we also included harm to self, not if it's a mental health issue and then they are cutting, for example. It's more like when it's in the context of AFCA and the child will use this to sort of like unconsciously control their environment based on their complex trauma or other diagnosis. And most of the times, it was not most of the time, every single time, it was related to neurodevelopmental disorders, like FASD was the most common, autism, lots of anxiety. Usually it was compounded by severe mental health issues. So again, you can look at the data. And I cannot stress it enough. We're not saying that people with autism or FASD are aggressive in any way, except people with neurodevelopmental disabilities may have a harder time with self-regulation. A lot of them have been through trauma, and this may lead to aggressive behaviors.
So what?
Yeah,
I'm taking over.
perfect.
I wanted to just we are going to talk a lot. I mean, there are a lot of neurodevelopmental disorders, and you're right. We the language is complex, and I've noticed the comment that Ken FASD is not seeing FAS or not calling FASD neurodivergent because it is in well. So I think we can all understand what we're communicating though. And we do want to specifically lean into FASD. And that's, again, not because FASD is the problem, but because FASD is still very poorly understood. And so we're seeing a lot of FASD with AFCCA. And so we always just really like to add information, because I think a lot of other things like ASD and ADHD are much more understood. So here are just some specific facts about FASD, and that is, can you back up for a second, that between 4 to 6% of Canadians in prevalence rate studies could be prenatally exposed to alcohol and could qualify for an FASD diagnosis. We don't have that many diagnosed because we don't have the diagnostic opportunity, and it's a complicated issue. FASD impacts, therefore, more people in Canada than autism, spectrum disorder, cerebral palsy, and Down syndrome combined. It's a huge thing, and it's all around us, but we don't necessarily know what we're looking at. And more than 90% of individuals with FASD have mental health issues, which is about poor fit of services, poor misunderstanding, and also prenatal alcohol exposure affects your nervous system. And so that's what having dysregulated nervous system is one of the prime factors for many mental health issues. Next one, Maude. So just a few, and believe me, this is just a few of the things that people with FASD sometimes struggle with or live with. Dysmaturity, which just means if I have a 16-year-old body and I have lived for 16 years, but my social and emotional expression and abilities are closer to a 10 or 11-year-old's, there's a mismatch of how I look and can manage the world. Executive functioning issues, so poor control, poor ability to think through and plan action, emotions that run faster than the ability to think. Impulse control, I already mentioned. Confabulation is just, what people see as lying, but it's usually more about, I may have short-term memory problems, so I'm going to fill in the blanks when I can't remember things properly. I may be giving you an answer that I think you want because I'm trying to please you. I may be giving you an answer that I think you want because I don't want to get in trouble, but I can't put all of the pieces together quickly enough to give you the answer that's accurate. So that's what confabulation looks like and is really common in the FASD population. Adaptive functioning issues are just that ability to adapt to the unwritten rules all around us, and difficulty understanding how to use those as I move through the world, which can lead to what looks like poor judgment. 90% of people with FASD have sleep issues. And I really want you to think about, if you have really big problems sleeping, don't you get kind of grumpy and maybe you don't talk to people nicely, and maybe it's a lot harder to manage everything in your world. The other thing that people don't always understand is that FASD is a whole body disorder. And as a whole body disorder, this means that people with FASD are living with pain, with illness, and with other things happening. And we often don't understand it or see it, and sometimes they can't describe it. And so that also, I mean, we all know when we're sick, we don't act our best. And then one of the most important things, we often hear people say they don't have the facial features, so they must not have FASD. And we still hear that a lot, but only approximately 10% of the people who have been prenatally exposed to alcohol will have the facial features. And the facial features are so subtle, we can miss them. So it's really important not to use that as a ruler for whether someone may have FASD or not. Those are all the facts about FASD we really wanted to share for now, but there's lots of great, lots of similarities about FASD and ASD. Very true. There are definitely some similarities. There are also massive differences. So what is commonly used to support people with ASD often can be very harmful to people with FASD and can actually increase aggression. So I would highly encourage you to look, if you want more training about FASD, there are FASD workers throughout Ontario who can do this training for you, agencies, schools, with very little, well, no cost actually. So please look that up and get a hold of your local FASD worker. Next one, Maude.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry, sometimes I click, but it doesn't come right away. Um, okay. And we wanted to, I wrote it in the chat, we wanted to give it a bit of a summary about FASD because it's probably the diagnosis we see most commonly in the families with support. Also a reminder that we are working within an agency that supports adoptive families. So that's probably why we see a higher rate of FASD. But there's many reasons why children use aggression. And so, and this is, I'm sharing this from research. Like she said, I did my PhD on this topic. So anyway, that's kind of my passion, trying to understand why children would use aggression, basically. Um, and it always comes down to self-regulation issues. But self-regulation issues have many reasons behind them. So I will cover some of them, but then maybe I'll talk more about the ones that are less common that maybe you don't hear about in trainings as much. So of course, one of them is attachment. When a child is not securely attached to their caregivers, this could lead to self-regulation issues. Again, if a child has parents that are not able to meet their needs 30% of the time, then this could lead to unsecure attachment. There's different types. I'm not going to talk about all of them. And even when the child has what we call attachment injury very early in their life, this could also lead to a brain that's wired differently and create some attachment or anxiety issues. So another one, something else that we want to look at is what's the developmental age of the child, not just chronological. So if they have a neurodevelopmental disabilities, they're 8, but really developmentally, they're more like 4. We could probably see aggression, and we will call this aggression because they're bigger. And at this age, usually they have more self-control, self-regulation, but maybe they don't. Another component will be intergenerational trauma. The brain can be wired differently. The prenatal alcohol exposure could be to drugs, could be to alcohol. And there's different other neurotoxins that can really affect the developing brain of the fetus. And this will change the way they will behave later on. There's other, and also like any abuse history could lead to self-regulation issues, mental health issues when they're older. Now I'm going to talk about elements that we don't talk about as much in our field. One of them is the perception, and we see that increasingly. So even if you're thinking of a child who has trauma or a child who even has neurodevelopmental disabilities, the way they will perceive a situation will be different than a neurotypical person. So a lot of our kids have internalized that when a parent set a boundary, or if they're saying no, they don't mean well. So the child will not experience the parental boundaries as a safety, concern, love, and care. What it does is will create narrative for them that the parent is not good, and so they're not going to want to comply to some of those demands. And we see that a lot in AFCCA. So the perception, so trying to understand the perception of the young person who displays the AFCCA is incredibly important, especially in FASD. I think, like both of us, Tanya and I we were therapists working with people with FASD, and sometimes you ask the parent, or you ask the youth, like, how was your week? They'll be like, it was great. And then you ask the parent, they're like, no, it wasn't. Right. And then you kind of like try to hear both perception. And the thing is, they're not necessarily lying. It really is the way they experience an event. Another one is aggressive script. So people who have a neurodevelopmental disabilities will be more influenced by social media, by what they see in the movie. So for example, if you're watching a movie and the hero uses violence or aggression to get their mean, they will likely be more influenced by that than a neurotypical person. And that this goes along with modeling. So like just looking at someone else's behavior, you're more inclined to use it. after. So for example, if the child has seen a lot of violent, aggressive behaviors, they're more inclined to use it. This is not something that we see more like in our field necessarily, because most of them have parents who are quite peaceful and non-aggressive, but sometimes they've seen it in their previous home. And sometimes they've seen it on TV, or sometimes they are in a school environment where there's a lot of those behaviors. So, and I'm not saying that classrooms that are accommodated for people with neurodevelopmental disabilities should not exist. They're good, but sometimes they see more of those behaviors in those classrooms. And the last one is the priming effect. So, okay, an example. Let's say I see Tanya, I step on her foot. I'm going to say, "Oh, sorry." I don't even think about saying sorry. It's just like it's prime in my head. Like it just comes out. So kids who have been using aggressive behaviors for a really long time, the behaviors become more and more entrenched, and it will be harder to probably reduce those aggressive behaviors. So this is kind of a summary of like some of the reasons why children use aggression. There's many of them. Oh, and she's asking like, what are some examples of neurotoxins that could affect the child prenatally? One
I
of them.
mentioned it. I already answered that one. I typed in the answer to that one.
Thank you. And there's things we don't necessarily think about, like PCP. Like there's research on like some plastics like PCP that is, but it's not necessarily, oh, they will use aggression. Usually when you meet a child who displays aggressive behaviors, it's not like, oh, they were prenatally exposed to PCP. Like it's like, okay, maybe you're thinking of prenatal stress. And then there's intergenerational trauma. And then there's an attachment history that there was a lot of disruption. And then they get placed in a loving family, but then they have other kids with FASD. So, it's like all those factors that can make the tornado. You saw my tornado earlier. I didn't explain it. Sometimes I just say, like you need a lot of factors to create the tornado. It's not like, again, it's not parenting. It's not the parent. It's not the child either. It's like a combination of factors that could lead to this storm. And if you want more information about how it came about, the consortium, we're also going to have more resources. You can find it on the consortium. The consortium is outside our program, but we thought it was important to present it because that's how we kind of created the program and learn, I guess, how to support families. That's me again. I'm thirsty. Okay. Family adaptation and resilience. So at the beginning of the program, we're trying to figure out how are we going to assess the needs of families who are experiencing AFCCA. And I'll have right after I'll have the case study. Okay, whoops. Sometimes my Zoom goes too fast. I'll start here, okay? So Cindy and John, loving parents, they adopted 3 kids. They have different kind of disabilities and needs. And one of them became increasingly aggressive during COVID, and that was really scary for both parents. And it's usually more towards Cindy than John. And quite often the child would say, the child is diagnosed with FASD, he's 14, and every time he's thirsty or hungry, he's like screaming at the parents, you bring me food, you bring me Coca-Cola, whatever, all unhealthy stuff. And the kids almost only eating hot dogs. He plays video games almost all day long and is refusing to go to school, lives in the basement almost. And every time there's a demand, it could lead to aggressive behavior. So the parents are really concerned about saying no. They're really concerned about, setting boundaries around video games. And then there's a combination of him not wanting to school and the school not accommodating for the FASD and also like not wanting to deal with the behaviors. And the child is highly demanding of all sorts of stuff. The family is not able to even invite guests because he will blow a gasket, in other terms, lots of property damage. And these things don't happen overnight, right? And we've seen that more during COVID because that's what kids had to do, stay in the basement and play video games. And so there's a lot of aggravation of what could have happened. And because of the fear, there has been, yes, he has FASD, but there has been some over accommodations. And now I'm regretting saying that because we're going to cover that later. We're just going to do that here, okay? Balancing the scale. So what does it look like for this family? And this is how we assess it. There's a lot of systemic supports and support within the family, lots of capabilities. So for example, they have lots of supporters around them who understand their experience. They have other friends who are adoptive families. The parenting experience, it's not the first child that they parented. The other kids are doing fairly well, even if they have neurodevelopmental disabilities. They have access to funding. They've been through all the parenting class you can think of. Most parents actually that we see, they could give trainings, parenting classes, right? And so they're quite capable. But at the same time, their child is quite aggressive, and that's very scary. And many times, the mom has been physically and emotionally hurt. Again, neurodivergence within the family on several of the kids. The children are coming from a place where they have experienced abuse and trauma, difficulties with managing the school because he's not going. The school is not necessarily equipped to or has the resources to help him or the understanding. And there's a lot of shame because what we talked about at the beginning is like society will look at the parents and blame them for what they're experiencing, for what the child is experiencing, how he behaves. So that leads to shame. And Tanya will talk about this further because when we're thinking, okay, this is not just practical strategies here we're talking about today, this is actually more of an approach and an understanding of it. So how do we support families? One of their need is like the shame that they're experiencing, and we need to reduce that shame. It's one of the ways that families will feel better and have a better quality of life. We see parents who have a lot of health problems, and there's a poor fit of services in families of AFCCA. We see that all the time. We need to do tons of advocating. The system navigation in Ontario is really difficult. We've been in the system for so long, Tanya and I, sometimes we just shake our heads like, okay, what we're doing here. And it leads to, judgment from families and friends. Sometimes families are isolated. A lot of times we see one of the parents having to stop working. And in this case, yes, the dad had to stop working. There was a lot of financial strain on the family. And what they often experience is like, yes, the aggression, but also the microaggression from sometimes services because it's a poor fit. The services don't necessarily understand AFCCA, the school, and then there's the child in itself who may just make comments every day about them not being good parents, not good enough. And these are microaggression that creates trauma. And I think Karine is here today. Karen Tremblay, who did a research on filial trauma, that's how she calls it, and how families who experience aggression from their child within the adoption context could have what we call filial trauma. Actually, I should probably put, like, Karine, if you're here, you can put in the chat the link to your paper. It's so interesting. It's both English and French. And it's not vicarious trauma like I could have as a professional because I go home and they're not my child. It's also the sense of how do you feel as a parent? And it's a very different kind of trauma. And when we are supporting families who have who are experiencing AFCCA, you have to kind of assume that they are traumatized parents, and you will hear it in the narrative. There's also the racism aspect, like this family has children from multiple ethnicities, and that also led to misunderstanding from the system. And the anticipated judgment, and again, the social isolation that these families are experiencing. And so what we try to do is to rebalance that scale. The system will often say, okay, let's give them more parenting classes or more books. And that's not necessarily what they need. Usually we need to reduce the shame, reduce the social isolation. We need to help both parents, when they're two parents or three, align themselves in how they will respond and just really focus on the quality of life of all family members. and even the funding aspect. And what's not on that scale, it's also like the meaning making. How do they make sense of their story? If their narrative is like, I'm a terrible parent, everyone think I'm a terrible parent, um, like I'm alone in this, no one understands, it's gonna feel a lot worse than if they feel supported and if they feel like there's a lot of people who have their back. And I think that's the first thing we hear from families, like sometimes their situation doesn't change that much, right, Tanya? But they're like, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one experiencing this. I feel so supported. You guys have my back. And it's all that really changes, yeah, their experience, I guess. So in my case study, and then that's Tanya's turn because I've spoken enough. But we were able to reduce the demandingness in the child. Sometimes we're not able to change the child, but sometimes we're able to make progress for the child. He is now asking nicely for things. There's still lots of accommodation being done because he has a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, but he has 2 friends and he goes to school. The school needed training, and increasingly they were able to change the way they were de-escalating things, and also the parents are more able to ask for support and they're not isolated the way they were before. Probably still too much hot dogs for the child, getting there. Probably the least of their concern right now, and there hasn't been incidents of aggression for about a year. So this is what some of the outcomes that we can see in our program. Sometimes the child change, but sometimes it's more the parent, the meaning making, the support. So I'll leave it to Tanya to talk about more like what are some of the approaches.
I think you skipped one. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to add to what Maude was just saying. We actually just got an email from a parent who's been in our program for probably over a year. And they were saying that they're noticing in general in our community that we support, that they feel like they're observing stronger resilience, which is really, really great to hear. I mean, that's anecdotal, but I think we're also seeing that people are feeling more. Oh, we can see that, Maude.
Yes, I'm trying to get rid of it. It's open, Karine's paper. Okay,
There we go.
we're back. So sorry.
No problem. So I'm just going to touch on the shame issue because I think shame and stigma are a huge issue when you're talking about AFCCA. And I think when we talked about people's assumptions, that really nails it a lot. As a society, we feel like we're good parents if our children are doing well. So what happens if our children aren't doing well? And when our children are using aggression, that's a pretty strong sign that they're not doing okay. And it's very difficult for a parent to be able to separate themselves from what's going on in their child because of how much pressure we have on being we're only good parents if our children are happy. So parents, as well as the child who is expressing AFCCA, feel a great deal of shame. And this is really important. We've never met a family who says that their child feels good about being aggressive. And in children that we both worked with, it's the same. They don't feel good about themselves. They just don't know a better way to do things. So just to look at the concept of shame is that I am bad, not I've done something wrong. I've done something wrong because I'm bad. And shame is such an intolerable feeling that it often creates AFCCA. It creates aggression because we have to push people away very quickly in case they see how bad we really are and get to know us. So there are different things we've learned, antidotes for the caregiver, social support, validation. Validating caregivers is really important. Well, we get that this is difficult for you. We see you're doing your best. We see how hard you're trying. We can understand that you must be thinking, not giving advice. So many parents become isolated because they've gotten so much bad advice, and they're just sick of people telling them. It's so condescending sometimes. Learning how to have self-control in the situation and kind of being able to go back to your values, which is one of the things that happens when we use one of the approaches we're going to talk about later. In children, shame, that intolerable thing, because like I said, it leads to that escalation, deflection away from me and away from you getting to see what's really going on inside of me. And so helping describe intentions, I think you had good intentions. I think you wanted to do that better. I think that really helps. Relational gestures that aren't based on behavior. I love you no matter what's happening here. And noticing any bit of effort that a child is putting in. And public opinion. So that piece of when an adult feels shame, they stop asking for help. They don't want to go to meetings. They don't want to tell people, and they become more and more isolated. And the greater the isolation, the greater the aggression, because violence definitely grows in secrecy. So we need children to know that their parents aren't going to be keeping secrets and are going to be talking to other people about what's going on. And we need to have other people that can hear and process that information and support effectively. Maude, can you go for the next slide now? Oops, you are muted. Oh.
I stopped sharing and I want to reshare because there's
Sure.
a problem. I'm trying to access the chat.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just gonna reshare. Sorry about that.
Okay,
Catherine was
there's
like,
always a technical.
Yep.
Another thing I'd like to talk about with the whole shame piece is that we need to keep in mind the power differential that parents experience when they talk to any professionals. So when you're talking to a doctor or when you're talking to a teacher, there is an inherent power differential that parents feel. And when they feel shame, it makes them even feel like they have less capacity to advocate. And parents can become more defensive and more overwhelmed in those kind of situations. And we have a lot of circumstances set up to make it difficult to work with some professionals. Things like our confidentiality laws in the medical professional make it really difficult because that means that you can be sending a 13-year-old into the doctor, and that 13-year-old might not be able to understand what the doctor is saying, might not be able to tell their story very well. But when a doctor says first thing that a 13-year-old can choose whether to have their parent in the room or not, most 13-year-olds would rather not have their parent in the room. So just things to keep in mind if you are a professional working with a parent, that there is a power differential, and anything you can do to validate and increase the equality of power in the situation with a parent, that really helps. It makes the relationship more collaborative, and that in itself actually can have an effect and push against aggression. We wanted to share a couple of the things that we're doing in our program. And I'm going to share the part about polyvagal theory because that's my special area. And polyvagal theory was created by someone named Dr. Stephen Porges, and it really looks at the autonomic nervous system. So that part of our nervous system that is created to protect us, for us to respond to a threat. When we are responding to threat, though, we don't actually notice what's happening in our nervous system. So, and as you can imagine, when you have AFCCA in your home, you feel like you're under threat quite a lot. So we see a lot of parents who, even when things are okay, they're still on. They become in AFCCA, you become quite hypervigilant, trying to figure out what's going to set off the next tornado. And so we help parents get to know how their system is working, how their child's nervous system is working, in order to help them recover faster from some of the threats, some of the issues that are happening, so that they can build some more resilience, and so that they can understand and work with their nervous system and not feel shame for how their nervous system is causing them to react. Because when we react to AFCCA, we don't feel like good parents. And when we can recover from the threat and be more responsive rather than reactive, we can feel more enabled as parents. And that actually helps our child to read more safety and not feel like, if we walk into a room and we're on edge because we know our child is in there, then our child is going to do something called neurocept, which is mean their nervous system is going to read your nervous system, and they're going to think, uh-oh, something's coming, and then they're going to start to escalate, and then we'll escalate back. And if we can learn how to regulate our own nervous system, And yes, sensory tools are good for helping manage your nervous system. If we can be managing our nervous system better, then we're going to be able to help lead our child and not have so much reaction between us. And that was, yeah, I was responding to Josh too about the sensory. Our nervous system responds to sensory things most quickly. So we can bring sensory safety, or we can feel sensory threat. And so understanding that is part of actually the understanding the polyvagal process. Go ahead, Maude.
And I think it really is about, sometimes it's the first step we do with parents of to help them recover from their trauma, right? Like we really, in our program, we don't support children and youth. We are funded to support the parents, the caregivers. And yeah, polyvagal is quite often the first step, and it's done as a group. And I think just hearing, and it's hard, I think, for parents to hear other people's story, but at the same, it's like, okay, I'm not alone, right? And just seeing like, you can tell like the other parents are really competent. And it's like, oh wow, okay, yeah, it's the same. I think the situations are all very unique, but the way they feel about the experience is very common, right? Like it's very kind of common feelings. So NVR, like polyvagal is Tanya's baby. Not that she created it, but NVR is mine. Not that I created NVR. And NVR is a socio-political approach at its core, but it was transformed by Chaim Omer, a psychologist in Israel, into a family systemic therapy. And we've been using it quite successfully in our program. You have the link here. When we send the PowerPoint, you can go on that link and you have like a broad range of research that has been done. It's evidence-based and it's for eating disorders, anxiety, kids in the foster care system, you name it. And it's the idea of having to live according to our values of nonviolence. And there's some components. I'm not going to explain everything about NVR, but maybe we can, when we send the PowerPoint, we can also send you a link of a resource that provides NVR training in Canada now, if you want to be trained. So some of the core components of NVR are learning some de-escalation strategies, prioritizing your concern as a parent. Where do you start to address some of the behaviors, addressing their shame and the trauma that they experience because of the AFCCA. We do a safety plan with most families, and we try to increase their presence. A lot of parents are so traumatized that they can't even be emotionally present with their child, some of them physically, although sometimes it's quite dangerous and they should not be in their child's presence without someone else, like sometimes it's really life-threatening. And that's why we do polyvagal. Like it's a good match, like really getting their nervous system in a place where they are emotionally safe when it's physically safe. And we really do it as a community and rallying supporters to support the family. And it's not a child-focused intervention, it's a family-focused intervention. Many services are child-focused. Oh, let's look at the triggers again and increase the parental hypervigilance, basically. And so that's not what we do. We really want to take care of the caregivers so they're more able to take care of their child. There's different patterns of escalation that Tanya, do you want to cover that with me? Okay. So there's two patterns in NVR that we talk about, and usually families will go, okay, maybe I'm using this more than that. We all have different patterns, and they're not necessarily bad. It's more like when you overuse them. So the giving in pattern is that when the parent is like in so much fear that they will say yes and have no boundaries and not impose anything out of fear of retaliation from the child. And sometimes it's to protect other siblings, to protect themselves, or sometimes they're just really traumatized and burned out. And there's the joint escalation where the parents will either lash out and then it's this kind of shouting match, or sometimes it's like over explaining and explaining, and sometimes there's different combinations, like the parents trying to is sort of giving in. So the other parent is like, oh no, she's giving in. So the other parent joined the escalation, or the sibling joined the escalation. So it's kind of like trying to figure out what are the patterns that are commonly happening and what can we do to change some of those patterns.
So we've already mentioned this before, but supporters is really where we start when we're starting with any family anywhere. And in fact, the whole way Adopt for Life works as a peer support program is super effective, because again, that isolation is so powerful in making people feel, well, here you go. Isolation grows. The aggression definitely grows when people feel isolated. And that was why it was such an issue that rose during COVID. Shame, that we've already spoken. People become exhausted. They just become really worn out, and they start to give up, and they feel very powerless. When we start to increase those community supports, people can start providing respite in other relationship for child. I think one of the things we're really talking about right now in our program is how the nuclear family being the answer for everything is really a pretty negative myth in our society. We need so much more than a nuclear family. And actually, I was presenting last week with Jen, one of our colleagues, and she was saying, she's a parent, and she was saying in her community, the people with typical kids have lots of support. They have other friends, they have they can access different programs for their child. When you have a child who uses AFCCA, you lose a lot of community support. But that means your child also doesn't have other people to talk to, and other people to experience being liked by other people, or experience being led in a positive way by other people. So community supports are quite powerful for that. Sometimes they can help with de-escalation. I'm going to show you a video, and you're going to see a little bit of that. They can provide understanding and connection and some problem-solving ideas, having a community that can all share with ideas, because it is difficult to be creative enough to outthink some of the problems in the services and the families. It is a buffer against adversity for families, and leaves them feeling so much more supported and less alone. It cannot begin to tell you, as Maude was saying, families tend to come to my polyvagal groups first. And for some of them, they have never been in a room with another family who experiences the same or similar thing. And the powerful experience of going, I am not alone, this is not just me, is profound. So I think, and it is so much more common than we have ever realized. And I think now that we're giving it a name, that it's going to become more and more spoken about. And I think that's very hopeful. So next, I think the next one will probably be the video. Is it, Maude? Next slide.
Yeah, Sawyer's answering in the chat.
Oh,
yes.
trying to multitask.
Okay.
So we're going to play this. This is an example of some of the videos that we've created in our program. Jen, who I spoke about a moment ago, she's a parent and she's amazing. And she is, she's really gifted at making these videos. So you're going to get to hear her voice. But this is some of the ideas we have about creating a network of supporters. Hopefully this is going to work.
Hi there, my name is Jen and I am an Ontario mother of 6. 4 of my children are adopted, and I have several children who are neurodivergent and have significant needs. I know that if you're watching this video, you likely have experienced many of the same things I've experienced as a parent, and I wanted to chat a little bit today about the importance of building a network of supporters for yourself as a caregiver. So from one caregiver to another, I wanted to share a few things in building this network for me that have worked and some things that have not. Okay, I had to switch to my comfy chair for this next part because I just wanted to get real with you all, and I wanted to talk about the issue of asking for help. If you're like me, I know many of us as adoptive kin or customary care parents are the same in that we are afraid to ask for help. We don't want to inconvenience others. And a lot of times when we have reached out to ask for help, we've been denied the help we need. And it's a very isolating experience to be in that boat, and it makes you want to give up. So you might be watching this thinking, I've tried all this, I've tried to get the support I need, and I haven't been able to get it. Please hang in there and keep watching, because I hope there's some tips here that can help you. So what I would love for you to do is maybe even right now while you're watching this video, or later, it doesn't matter, to get out a piece of paper and physically draw on it who you would like to invite into your circle of support. So for me, this might look different for lots of people. Some people like to draw bubbles or one big circle. For me, it meant drawing a circle and really thinking and getting creative on there, what I needed help with and who I was going to turn to for that help. You might get stuck. I got stuck at first and couldn't even think of a single person outside of my immediate family. So don't be worried if you get stuck. It may take you some time. You might have to ask somebody else to help you think of supporters. First, you're going to list people on there that would be available at the snap of a finger by phone or text. So this doesn't have to be somebody who lives close by. This could be somebody who lives hours away, but it's literally somebody you can call when you're in a crisis to help either talk you through it, or just from a practical side. Say grandma lives a province away from you, but you know that if you call grandma and put her on speakerphone, somehow that automatically de-escalates your child. Sometimes your child doesn't want anybody else hearing them being aggressive. So if they know speakerphone is on, the aggression comes down. The next thing I did was list a couple people that would be available to me physically. Is there a neighbor who would be understanding if you explained your situation that, hey, if I text you, I need help now, could you just come over and just walk right in the door? So they might just come over, walk in the door with an excuse. Maybe they'd say, hey, I need to borrow a gallon of milk. And sometimes that's just enough to get somebody else in the room, and it surprises your child and it gets them to stop, or it helps to get you into a safe place, because adding another adult into the room who's going to support you as a caregiver is incredibly important. If you don't have a neighbor, this might be a family member that lives close by. It could even be something as simple as a school teacher or an EA in the community that your child is kind of jived with and your family respects. So those are kind of your emergency supports. And then you want to broaden from there. You as a caregiver, you're not going to be able to really thrive or survive unless you have time really to have a break from your child and your family. So you're going to need to have supporters in your circle who are going to be available for you to take over so that you can get away and restore yourself. This could be a really trusted babysitter, or perhaps a child and youth worker who can come in and offer you some respite. Maybe it's a camp in your community, a church organization, a before and after school program, just as many outside village supports as you can get to schedule into your calendar regularly, daily, weekly, monthly, that you can get away and restore, so that you are able to come back and return to your child rested and just feeling internally strong. I want to put a little caveat in here, and that is to be selective and careful. You want people on there that support both your child and you as the caregiver. It's surprising how many people you will ask for help will come in and be very supportive for your child. They'll try to be your child's BFF, and they won't support you as much as the parent. And then what ends up happening is they drive a wedge between you and your child and the attachment you are trying to build together. And this isn't just family and friends who can do this. There are professionals, there are therapists who do this as well. So be really careful and selective, and make sure you are choosing people in your village that are going to, yes, connect with your child and be there for your child, but that are always going to keep directing your child back to you as the caregiver, reinforcing the bond. Once I figured out that my circle needed to be full of those types of people who also valued me as a person, that made me feel like I didn't need to be a doormat. All of a sudden, things got a lot better in my ability to parent my children, in my ability to have healthy boundaries for myself, to take care of myself. And please know that even if you're in a really desperate situation right now and you don't feel like you have help, you don't feel like you have anybody you can turn to for support, there are people out there that want to help. It could just be too, you've maybe asked them for help, but they didn't know how. So be specific. Tell them exactly what you need them to say in scenario A, B, and C. And you'll be surprised at how many people actually do really want to be there for you. So I hope there was something here in this video that's helpful to you. I wish you well, and I hope you're taking good care of yourself. Thanks, guys. Bye.
I think we're very grateful for Jen and having Jen in our, she's a really strong communicator. And I think you can hear it. There's some really specific ideas. Every time we ask a family about supporters, well, almost every time, most of our families feel so much like they don't have anyone. It's hard for them to be creative. And so we have the video, we have some nice worksheets to help people kind of think through, and we'll work through it with them to help them think through who could be there. And the other thing that really does help is having parents who've done this before, or parents in the community that can help people think through different creative ideas, because this is really a key foundational piece of what we need. So this is an example of one of the sheets that we can, or one of the tip sheets we've created that we can hand to families. We have worksheets and tip sheets. There's a couple more, I think, in the next slide that we can show you of other ideas that we are trying to help people. We try to make these really kind of bite-sized and as useful as possible. We try to make our videos really short because we know people are overwhelmed and it's hard to learn new things. Can you do the next slide, Maude? These are, well, there's the rallying supporters one again, the whole tip sheet. And then here's another one on relational gestures. We have numerous tip sheets that we've created. Relational gestures are just the little tidbits of things that make us feel good as parents that we can do for our loved. We think that if we do something nice for a child who's being aggressive, we're rewarding the behavior, but actually that's not how it works. Relational gestures are just little loving things that make us feel like we're being a good parent, even if they're not accepted well by the child. When you keep doing that and practicing it, it helps us feel helps us feel better, but it also over time can help a child realize, hey, you do still love me despite what I'm doing, despite the struggle I'm having. So that's just another tip sheet that we have.
I should mention, Tanya, they're not available to the public.
Yeah.
They're for the families that we support, but the videos are public on the YouTube page, right? So, and most parents, I think they use the videos more than the tip sheet.
Yeah, I think that's true
Good
too.
to have.
But I think it also does kind of speak to, it's not that difficult to create these. So I think there are different agencies and different services that can create really simple tip sheets for people. And we'd be happy to give ideas about that if you'd like.
And even I think for professionals, especially the one on rallying supporters, I don't think we do a good job sometimes at really supporting families and like being creative about the kind of supporters they can get. So even like when you're thinking of first responders, one of the first thing you want to do is for them to have someone to vent to or to talk to after an incident, right? So it's the same for siblings and for the parents. So the first step, like for supporters, is like, okay, do the siblings have someone to talk to if there's an incident? Even the person who displays AFCCA, right? Having someone to talk to, and that's part of the supporters. And quite often families at first they're like, no, I have no one, or I don't want to shame my child. And it's really breaking those obstacles. And at some point, the families have way more people to support them. It's kind of what you said, Tanya. Like, I think, especially in the adoption world, it's like we're trained to be the primary caregivers for attachment. And then it's just unsustainable when you have a child with such high needs.
The next one's yours, Maude.
Yeah, accommodations versus enabling. So in the world of FASD, I think when Tanya and I started early 2000, like our whole life was around, let's make people understand that FASD is a brain-based disability and we need to provide accommodations. It's still true, but we've been also seeing that sometimes it can be more like enabling than accommodating. And an example that I like to give, if some of you know Miles Immelrich, I'm just not gonna say it right, but
You
just
did, you
say
said
it.
it right.
Really, I've been practicing. Anyway, so he talked about like how difficult it was for him to be on the plane because of the smell. And I think an over accommodation or enabling would be, I'm not gonna go on a plane anymore. But for him, his accommodation was like, I'm gonna wear my own perfume that I'm okay with. And that's how he was able to go on the plane. So yeah, and just I use this example all the time because it's so practical. So when we're trying to assess with the family, okay, can your child ask nicely if he wants food? You know, we understand maybe there's some sensory issues around what he's able to eat, but the way he's asking, is it really the FASD or not? So some questions that we found, and we found it in a book that's based on NVR and this program created it's called the SPACE program. Maybe some of you know, for children with anxiety. 3 questions you can ask yourself or help the parent asking themselves is, are we trying to avoid triggers at all costs to the point where it's really impacting your quality of life and the quality of life of the other siblings? Like a family that I knew was not able to use the computer in the home and the living room. It belonged to the child with the AFCCA. So that's an over accommodation, right? Like they were trying to avoid triggers at all costs. And it was making, like, it wasn't helping the child to gradually cope more. So often with FASD, it's also a growth mindset. We provide accommodations, but we're also teaching skills, like they're able to progress. And another question is like, is it helping my child to avoid more? Like, is my child world going to get smaller and smaller and smaller? You know, if we go back to the case study from the beginning, the parents were not allowed to have guests in the home anymore at all. And is there a middle ground, right? Like their world was getting smaller, the child's world was getting smaller. I'm not saying every weekend you're going to have like a loud party. You know, we still want to respect the child's needs, but they were able to reintegrate having guests over with support to the child so it goes well. And I think that's an area that I was just checking the chat in case I needed to answer a specific question. I don't know, like, is it something, I'm curious, like you can write in the chat, is it something you're seeing in your field, like in your practice as well, or in your family, if you're a caregiver? Like, do you see that sometimes it may be an over accommodation? And we're also, you know, we want to acknowledge this is a fine line. This is really hard sometimes to assess. It's not like, oh, we've got the answer here. That's an over accommodation. Not really, right? It's more like, okay, let's sit down and figure this out together. So, and maybe I'll answer the chat's question while you're talking about de-escalation strategies, Tanya.
I just want to put in a little tiny bit about the over accommodation that I've realized is, in particular anxiety, the more we over accommodate anxiety, the more we feed it, the bigger it gets. So the more we avoid doing something that makes us uncomfortable, the more uncomfortable. And I'll give you an example. My stepdaughter's afraid of cats. And so she avoids everything to do with cats. And I feel like maybe that could be something she could get over if she would allow herself. Sorry, that sounds really judgmental. Hope she never sees this. But I think that it's kind of an example of, there's not actually any specific trauma. It's just something but it gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time, the more she avoids and avoids and avoids it. And it's actually not that hard to avoid cats if you don't want to. Anyway, so we want to talk just a few very practically about some de-escalation and co-regulation strategies, because co-regulating and de-escalating really matter. And de-escalating is not about preventing aggression exactly. It's about when things are already going, what can we do? Well, sometimes it's about preventing, but also what can we do in the moment when things are escalating? So creating a safety plan when things are calm. And we have some really good safety plan tips. I think we might, anyway, we have a lot of really good safety plan information. And it really matters to be creative around a safety plan and be very specific around what's happening. It's not just about calling 911, because for some parents, that's a really difficult thing to do, depending on many different things and where you live and who you are and how you believe the response is going to be. But also sometimes there's ways to de-escalate with supporters that can be much faster, like Jen was saying in the video. So creating a really strong safety plan can help. A big one that I've learned is to slow down. Rarely is our nervous system wants to respond to escalation as if it's a life or death emergency, and rarely is it. So anytime we can stop, take a breath, slow down the way we talk. I've learned over time that if I can talk more slowly, I'll be heard better, because so many of our people have processing speed issues. And if we're really stressed out, our processing speed slows down. So if I slow down my talk, I'm thinking through my words, I automatically speak more lowly, and I don't sound like I'm escalating. I sound in control. I feel more in control. And that can be more effective for co-regulating. It's not going to give the person in the room the sense that I'm scared or I'm out of control, which will escalate them further. Giving yourself a chance to take a breath and ground yourself before you go into something that's, might be an escalating situation, or even before you start talking. Another one is really effective is matching the intensity of the situation of the person. If someone is escalating, they're up here and they're really upset about something, and you're coming at it from everything's fine. What they feel is you don't get it. You don't care. You're not interested. So they're going to feel like they need to escalate further to convince you this really matters. So if you can somehow find a way to go, wow, I see this really matters, either with your voice, your expression, with words, and then bring yourself back into, let's work through this together. I really want to hear what's going on. I want to help. You're more likely to have the person follow you down than increase the escalation. So that's a really, really effective tool. Someone may escalate, you may meet them, start to bring them down, they might escalate again. You have to go back up again with that, oh my gosh, I really do get that this matters. I'm trying really hard. So that's a really useful co-regulating and de-escalating strategy. Calling on those supporters. If you've already created a plan, or if you can think of, like Jen described in that video. And another really useful one is distracting. And I know a lot of us use that with toddlers. It's also useful, when a toddler is asking for something and they're a little bit stuck, if we can get them distracted and thinking about something else into a different part of their brain, that's super effective. Nourishing can be nourishing with emotion, with something that someone wants, with food, with a cold glass of water, with something that is like a caring thing, but it's also nourishing. And it's not about rewarding the behavior, it's about de-escalating and making safety. And so we have to be careful, because we sometimes feel like in that moment, if I give this kid who's losing their marbles a popsicle, I'm rewarding their behavior. But if they didn't ask for a popsicle, we're going, hey, why don't you have a popsicle with me? Then I'm doing something with them and also distracting them and giving them something that's completely distracting and it's not the message they were expecting to receive. And it can really help get a brand unstuck in the moment, which is really important when you're wanting to bring safety. Can you go for the next one, Maude? We just kind of created this, this kind of, anyway, another kind of way to look at the de-escalation. So focusing on managing the risk, not on changing behavior, not on teaching a lesson, not on any of that, just manage the risk. We want to keep everyone as safe as possible. Delaying your response is really useful. Again, that's that slowing down, not reacting too quickly, giving yourself a chance to respond and not react. Anything you can do that lowers your own arousal state. Now, the next one we love, this is an NVR concept, strike when the iron is cold. So don't try to fix this, solve it, deal with it in the moment. Wait till everyone is calm, and we're over it. That's when you can talk about it again. So de-escalation is not about changing the child's behavior. It's about lowering emotional states, your own and the child, whoever is escalating. That is the goal, not fixing the problem. I don't know if you had anything to add to that, Maude. Oh, you're muted.
I'm just going to answer a question. Ooh, okay, we had very often is people think it's CPI or nonviolence communication, and they're all different things. So nonviolent resistance is a family systemic therapy, and we do talk about de-escalation techniques. Another thing that I'd like to share that I read recently is people with neurodevelopmental disabilities have less mirror neurons. So mirror neurons is they were discovered not that long ago. It's basically if I see Tanya yawning, it's probably sure that I'm going to yawn just by seeing her. And that's also how humans learn, and even animals, a lot of them learn behaviors. But people who have brain-based disabilities have less mirror neurons. So even parents who are trying to model good behaviors, their child may not learn from it necessarily. But I do feel like with the de-escalation, again, it's like even if you model the right behavior, maybe it's not going to work. But if your emotional state, which is something more of a feeling than something you see, that's probably going to help. And sometimes really it's like some parents will do all these things, or professionals, and still the child might escalate, right? So we also want to acknowledge that we're not coming with, oh, we know what to do, you do this, and this isn't like solve it all recipe at all.
No, and sometimes what works today won't work tomorrow, and we all know that's really, really complicated. And I just had a thought. Josh, I just noticed there is a note, the mirror neuron theory for neurodivergence was debunked. We would love to see any information you have on that. If you can, please send that our way, because we definitely want. Thank you. Yeah, I think I just really want to say, for so long we were taught if we're calm when someone's escalating, the escalating person will catch our calm. So I think that's one of the biggest things we're saying here is, no, an escalating person doesn't catch calm generally. If we can be embodied and calm, but even we've learned another technique, which is borrowed from sports psychology, which I'm not going to exactly explain, but the purpose of it is to help someone come into a situation where they feel safe and embodied inside, but they have the energy to meet the energy demands that the person is feeling. Because when someone is escalating, their heart is beating, they feel scared, there's all sorts of things going on inside of them. And if we can't acknowledge that, that person just feels alone. And so we can't be effective. So we do have to figure out some way of being able to validate or communicate that we see there's an intensity in this situation for that person, and we want to meet that need without meeting the anger and the aggression if possible.
Christina had a question in the chat. I don't know if you've seen it, but she's like, when you're distracting, nourishing, she said, maybe it's not about the thing they're asking for. And yes, she's right. Like, it's not like, let's say the child comes and they start, escalating. You see, it could turn into aggression. And maybe they were asking for video games or whatever. You might go like, oh, we're going to make pasta tonight. Do you want to join me and do it with me?
Yeah.
That's kind of distracting. And for us, it's not like, even when we're talking about the de-escalation patterns of giving in, you're in the car and the child starts to hit you and it's dangerous for your life. Maybe you want to say yes and pull over. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're focusing on managing risk at all costs, because like what we're talking about are like extreme situations. They're not like little tantrums, right? And so that's the first step. And then sometimes, you know, you may want to use distraction, not all the time, but yeah, if
And actually,
you're,
that kind of speaks to perseveration, because we know perseveration gets to be an issue with people who are escalating. And perseveration is really just a sign that someone is dysregulated. And so trying to solve the problem that they're perseverating on, perseveration just means my brain is stuck on an idea. And I'm sorry if you can hear my dogs barking in the background. I do have people managing that. But if I'm sure there must be a squirrel somewhere. If someone is perseverating, we don't ever fix the perseveration by giving in. And that's a really hard thing. Perseveration is a really difficult thing to manage. So the distracting and anything that can be done that can regulate the nervous system is going to be more effective at breaking down the perseveration than actually giving in to what they're perseverating about. Sometimes giving in, you can try it and see if that lowers it, but then we can end up with that giving in escalating pattern. And as you can tell, as we're talking about this, there is no simple answer, and none of it works 100% of the time. Again, just wanted to add a little bit about safety planning tips. A safety plan is really, really important. And again, we sit with parents a lot, and we really think through, you know, who can help? What are the things that tend to escalate you? What are your child? What are the moments that you're most worried about? For example, helping someone because their partner is going to be out of town. And in that case, I'm more nervous because I'm alone with the child. So who can we call? Who are the specific people? Safety plans need to be very specific and very much thinking about what can help keep my child de-escalated as much as possible or regulated as much as possible. And then what can buy time and keep us safety. And when we do this, when someone is safe, then they've practiced it so that when they're in the moment, they don't have to think it through, because they can't. Because when escalation's happening, it's so much harder to think. Can you go to the next one, Maude? I think we have our safety plan tip sheet. There it is. So there, again, we've come up with a tip sheet, because sometimes, I mean, like we mentioned at the beginning, there are over 600 families. We cannot do safety plans for all of our families. But we have tip sheets, and sometimes people can create their own safety plan, but it's super stressful. So just having another person beside them to co-regulate them and be creative with them to think it through and have something like a guideline can really help create that safety plan, so that in the moment they have more to rely on inside and they're not just coming up with whatever they can. Yeah, because then we're responding and not reacting. And safety plans cannot always create safety. And sometimes we have to do things like get out of the house, call 911, get emergency professionals to help us. That is their job. Okay. Just a little what caregivers need. This is what we're hearing from the many caregivers that we have been supporting. They need us to validate what the difficulty is that the challenges that they're managing. So understanding that AFCCA is not rare is incredibly common. Parents don't feel it. If you're isolated, you think it's only you. Acknowledging what are the feelings that they're experiencing, that shame that they're experiencing, that overwhelm and feeling that failures, understanding that that's what they're going to feel, but that's what all of the families feel. And that is also a normal part of the process. They need support. And we know that post-COVID, the resources are pretty thin. But we'd really like, I think we've really learned that the more people that collaborate, the more people that come around a family, the more we can get better support for free and more creative support. And we all really need to work on destigmatizing this issue, because this is not about bad parenting and bad kids.
Want me to switch to the other slide?
Yeah, I think it's yours, actually. The next one was yours.
Yeah, I just want to add something at some point I thought, okay, maybe we should have like an acronym. What do caregivers needs? Um, because we were asking people like, what do you think is what people should know about AFCA and what family needs? And there's another one that I think we should add is that's important for caregivers is being believed. And it's okay to kind of like listen to people and validate, but they need to know you believe them. And I think a lot of caregivers who experience AFCA, they feel like that a lot of people don't believe their experience, like because sometimes it's so extreme. And so just saying that, like, I believe you, goes a long way. And like Tanya said, acknowledging validation, um, and breaking the isolation by providing support groups, matching them with other families, all these things that don't necessarily cost anything. And I think some people are like, this isn't a practical strategy, but it is, right? Like it really makes a difference. Like when you ask families who've recovered, it's those things that were, I think, key to their well-being and focusing on the quality of life of all family members, not just targeting what we can do to change the child's behavior. Sometimes we manage to change the child or youth, but not always.
And I think
Um,
that, oh, you go. Actually, I had another thought and it's just gone. You go.
it's gone already?
Like that.
Let me know if it comes back.
Okay.
And the stigma part, that's also something that was developed by our equity diversity team. It's recognizing that in families who are experiencing AFCA, there's multiple layers of stigma. We've been talking about FASD a lot because that's usually a population that we're seeing and neurodevelopmental disabilities. But these families also experience other kind of stigma. So, for example, gay fathers who have adopted share that it's even harder for them now that we want to compare how hard it is for people, but because they already feel like they need to prove themselves as good parents. And then when they have that experience, and an additional layer of shame. Um, it could also be to having children with multiple ethnicities. So, for example, a lot of parents of Black youth are really concerned about calling the police or first responders at times. And so it's kind of considering the other types of stigma that may be happening in the families. And again, when I say that, when I talk about, let's say, vulnerability factors in those communities, or there's also a lot of protective factors that we don't think about, but that we also should acknowledge and sometimes use, like what's in a community that you can access. Like some of those communities are very close, and are very supportive of one another. We also realize that fathers or people who identify as fathers have very unique needs. So we've developed a support group. We think it's the first one in the world, and it's with Al Coates. Al Coates is a social worker from the UK, so he's running it from there. But he's also an adoptive father, has been through AFCA, and fathers have really helped this like this group. I think there's like 30 dads registered so far. And I guess I can share a little bit what we've learned. We will have soon an evaluation, like a formal evaluation with funded by Kids Brain Health Network and Queen's University. But so far, what we're hearing from them is that it's mostly, like if I talk about heterosexual couples and families where there's two parents, the fathers often don't attend the trainings as much as their female partner. And usually the aggression is towards the mom. So what happens is that they feel really disconnected from what they're supposed to do. And whenever they're trying to do something, they're told they're not doing the right thing. They're also more inclined to join in the escalation and wanting to protect. And it's also like social services is very much like a female leaning kind of world. So it's hard for them to have other people who identify as males to talk to. So at first we were kind of struggling, how are we going to provide services to them without being sexist and like, right? Like stereotypical or whatever, but we realized, okay, we really do have unique needs. And that's what we've been able to provide, but we're also very much learning from that. And for fathers, I think as clinician, just for us naming that this how you've been feeling, they're like, yes, finally someone get it, right? So yeah, so having that place for people who identify as fathers has been really helpful.
It's been helpful in a different way too, I think, because our community has been more father aware in the groups. So for example, the NVR groups that we run, we ask if we have two parent families, we ask both to attend. But in polyvagal we weren't, but we now have way more fathers attending the polyvagal groups as well. Because I think that just the sense is that we are acknowledging that this is important for both parents, and so yeah, I think that's understanding that difference and some of the subtleties about it has actually helped us support more people.
And we will have more resources on the YouTube channel with people identify as dads talking. There's one on a dad right now who talks about when your partner is experiencing aggression. You can watch it. It's really good. Like Tanya said, we make our videos really short. So this is one of our preliminary program evaluation. I did a pilot study before on NVR and FASD. It worked out really well. So then we included NVR to our program. And this was from our first cohort. But I think we have similar results right now. Everyone said they will recommend doing NVR to other families who are experiencing AFCA. But I think everyone's getting something out of it that is different. Some of them like understood how shame was experienced in their family and how to recover from that in the trauma. More able to self-regulate. A lot of parents were like, I was so traumatized, it was hard to regulate myself. So they gain in those abilities. And more constancy between both parents when there's two parents in the home. And also, like we said here, 9 out of 11 agreed program was adapted to their child's diagnosis. The other two were like, I didn't know was adapted. Because one of our concerns, like a lot of programs are not adapted to kids with FASD or trauma. Some of them are not trauma informed. So again, we did kind of transformed NVR a little bit when we did it, but it seems like it was quite adapted to their child's diagnosis. So again, we're going to send those slides if you want to know more about this, and we're still learning about how we can support families who are experiencing AFCA, but NVR and polyvagal has been really helpful in supporting families. Some of those possible outcomes that we've been seeing is that families feel more competent in their role as parents because, like we said, that society and like the system often makes them feel like they're not competent, but they are. They feel more connected as a family. Even when the child moves out, sometimes it improves the parent to child relationship, even if they leave, because we also provide NVR for families who have a child in care or living in another kind of co-parenting environment that Tanya, I think you want to talk about. Parents say they have better self-regulation. We give them a lot of tools for it. It's also key that they recover from their trauma, but also a change in their narrative. So often, we meet families that are like, nothing have tried worked, which oftentimes is not really true. They've done a lot of things that work, but it's still a difficult situation. I'm a terrible parent. I'm alone in this. No one understands to like, I'm feeling supported. I feel like I have people I can talk to. I'm not the only one going through this. And a lot of parents in our program have been like, now they're advocates, family advocates. They help one another. They're starting initiatives, and it's really nice to see that, to see them being empowered. And they have better boundaries with their children, but also sometimes with professionals who may make unwanted recommendations or advice. And it's, yeah. And then VR also helps families advocate within the system in a way that feels respectful for everyone. We also are developing safer language. We included one specific to FASD, one specific to adoption, because that's our area of work. We've included them here, but mostly I talked about it at the beginning. When we're talking about AFCCA, we use AFCCA. We say children who display aggression. We don't really use the word violence unless we really need to. And we always give context to the situation. Like whenever we say, oh, the child was displaying aggression and maybe wanted to gain control. If we say something like that, we'll say why, because of their anxiety, for example, or because of, their trauma or whatever. So again, I don't think we have time to go over this stuff too much, but do you want to talk about the abandonment piece, Tanya? I feel like you explained it so well.
Sorry, what?
Like when we're talking, like when we interact with some systems and they use the word abandonment when the child has to go live somewhere else.
Well, I only talk about it because I was maybe in a meeting and I maybe didn't. And well, abandonment, any child, any parent who is in a meeting with protection and they're saying that we can no longer have the child in our home is not abandoning the child. They are, every family we've worked with, they are desperately trying to find better supports, and they realize they no longer can be that. It's an incredibly painful thing. I've never again found a family that has met a family that said, I don't want to have anything to do with my child. They just don't know what to do with their child, and they are alone and they feel alone and they feel like the system might be able to do a better job than they can. And so abandonment is just the wrong word to use. These are parents who are desperately dedicated, have tried everything they possibly can think of, but they're out of ideas and overwhelmed and not safe, and they perceive that they are no longer helping their child but making things worse, and they're just desperate for help. So we really don't love the word abandonment, even though it is a box that apparently needs to be checked within the system. So anytime we can avoid using that word, it's great. But there is a lot of breakdown in families right now that we're hearing about and walking alongside. Well, maybe we should do this fairly quickly because I'd love to get to a couple of questions at the end, and we are starting to run. Just wanted to say we are developing a community, but we have developed a community practice. So there are a lot of people, a lot of professionals, a lot of families in the whole province who are interested. And outside of the province, I actually noticed we have people from the States. We have a lot of people from Nova Scotia on this call. So we've just really tried hard to develop, because we can't make changes in the systems, and the systems definitely need some overhaul, and we all know that. So maybe if we can connect with and collaborate with a lot of people, we can start to find out where we can start to raise awareness and create change. So if anyone's interested in being part, I'm not sure if we're Oh, okay, there we go. The consortium is national for folks outside of our province. Great. That's what Maude just mentioned. So we're looking for
the link for the consortium is in the slides that we will send.
Yeah. So and you can also just Google AFCCA consortium. It's all there, real easy to find. But we're kind of happy that this community practice has started. It's just starting. These are some of the workshops that we can do, or also the regional parent liaisons in the area can do some of these as well. So if you think that you are in an agency and you are interested in having workshop, then let us know. These are some of the topics we've covered. What else do we have?
I am trying to change the slide.
Yeah. This is okay. Yeah. Just, I like this. How can professionals help? Just a summary, acknowledge what's happening, offering some de-escalation strategies, finding respite. Our kids and families need a break from each other. They need breathing space so that they can recover and start to practice new ways of being. And we need to support, develop some safety plans. So if you are a person who can help with creating safety plans, that would be great. And this is just some information. We are going to be changing our name. So just so you know, that's coming. soon. We will not be known as Adopt for Life, so look out for that. But that's coming in a couple of months. I think we're starting. The website on the last slide.
Oh, there
yeah,
was a slide. So sorry, Tanya.
that's okay. No, Josh just asked a question. What was the website on the last slide? So
Oh,
the
okay.
second last one, I guess.
There was no last slide, yeah.
Oh, it's just the Adopt for Life. It's our Adopt for Life website. Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. We'll put it in the
Google
chat.
Adopt for Life and look up AFCCA. Thanks, Catherine.
Okay, Lauren's asking, so now we can answer questions. I'll read out loud the questions that come in the Q&A. Or Tracy. Tanya,
There was one earlier and I clicked on it and so that kind of disappeared, but it was about how do I help a family who is adopting? What the biggest thing I could say is supporters. Be a supporter, encourage more supporters, rally more supporters around. Sometimes in adoption, families are being taught to kind of cocoon with a child. And that is actually really overwhelming. So we're kind of pushing against that teaching and saying, actually, you need to be looked after, and we need to have a community and network of supporters, not just a nuclear family. That's a new concept, and it is not a healthy concept in these cases. Do you have another one, Maude? You have lots of them.
Yes, and thank you, Tanya. Is there a way to become involved in the consortium and psychologists? I would love to be involved. So again, Committee of Practice is provincial. And consortium is national. So we're still looking for funding for the consortium to make it sustainable. So now we have a strategic planning committee. You can go on the website, look at everything. You can write to communicate with the consortium, talk about your interests. So then you'll be on a list. And then whenever it's, I don't want to say more inclusive, but like when we have projects, we can let you know what's happening. We're developing quite a few resources. But you can find it on LinkedIn. I don't know, Catherine, if you can post the consortium link on LinkedIn, because now we have increasingly more resources on that page because it's easier than the website. Yeah, we even have because Christine Gervais, she's a researcher at Ottawa U, and she's developing resources based on her research, like from a child's right perspective, from a perspective of someone who has displayed AFCCA in the past, and from the sibling perspective as well.
I want to just branch in there. Someone was asking, and I wanted to mention something about co-parenting, because that came up with the foster care, asking for if NVR would be useful. One of the things that we have learned, oh my goodness, I just suddenly, hold on a second. I clicked on there we go. Sorry. One of the things we have learned is in that whole concept that the nuclear family is often not enough and that community really matters. Sometimes a child, especially a child who has had massive amounts of attachment trauma, living in the home is so triggering that it's very difficult to do any other kind of relationship development or safety or anything. Sometimes creating some distance from the intense attachment and having a co-parenting situation with either a family sometimes in foster care, there's different arrangements that people are trying, but collaborating as co-parenting. Think good divorce, two parents working together, as many parents as possible, as many adults and caring adults around a person as possible, is going to increase the sense of a child being able to safely attach at their own pace and learn from many voices saying the same thing. They'll start to be able to kind of internalize some of the concepts, and that can lower the aggression. So that's one of the things we're kind of trying to share and make people aware of, to be creative around housing, because sometimes a nuclear family is not even close to being enough.
I just want to draw your attention. There are a few questions that popped up quickly on the chat. So one of the questions is, does it cost for a family to join your program?
Who wants, I'll answer. So no, there is no cost. The issue can be that it needs to be an adoption. Actually, Catherine, you can probably even, you've been here the longest. You've been part of Adopt Life for longer than both of us. But no, our program is free. It is funded by the government, and there is no cost involved.
I think this comes to the next question is there anything available in the US? And I don't know
Yeah.
if it's specific to NVR training or
No, I
resources.
threw that in. That NVR is, but we've been when we do we've just done a bunch of NVR training, and fortunately there are some people in the US. The US is a pretty big place, so that's starting to become known in the US. We don't know of specific resources, and I don't know if you're looking for resources just around AFCCA, but we're trying to share as much as we can, and we
If
don't
that
know
person writes to us, I think we can connect them with Peter Jacob,
Okay.
depending on where they are.
US, not UK.
Yeah, he's in the US now. Oh no, but he's American. Anyway, he knows the people there.
Okay, good to know.
Maybe we'll try. We can try.
Yeah.
I'll just write the email in. And I know that a big issue that's been coming up is around, like you're saying, the access to anyone who is in adoption, kinship, or customary care. But getting access to the Adopt for Life website, the YouTube, those are all public. You don't have to be a registered part of the community to get that. And I know that the AFCCA support teams are trying to be very strategic around sharing as much as possible while still acknowledging funding constraints and funding leaders in that way. So I just wanted to share that as well. And you can always join as a professional as Adopt for Life, and it's free for you guys to join. And that's also a way that we can potentially provide some resources and supports. And if we don't know the answer, we'll help you find someone who does as well. I just had to jump in there. I couldn't let you guys just talk.
No, good. You know, you're the expert. You're way more the expert on a lot of this stuff because you've been around. We kind of have our very focused little world, and Catherine has been in the Adopt for Life.
You're calling me old is what
I'm way older than you. So much older than you.
I've been with Adopt for Life for quite some time. So we're learning about how to be strategic, but also we appreciate that there is a gap in service. But hopefully with the world starting to listen and understanding AFCCA, that's where all the amazing funding is going to come. So it can just be brought to everybody. And we're just going to somehow duplicate both of you into about 6 people each. So we're good.
Well, I think that the community of practice makes us feel hopeful because again, we're really strategically trying to bring people in from a lot of different areas to try to have a voice and hopefully have some push. But I think I've been struck, and I feel like saying it out loud, that we are still in the aftermath of COVID. We're not in rebuilding yet. We're in recovery still, I think. So that's tough being in this place because we're all feeling the constraints of that and also the effects of COVID still. So I do believe we're going to get to rebuilding.
In a different way. Like there's things that I think we, even for us as therapists, we thought were the right thing for a long time. Like, for example, like really focusing on the primary caregiver for attachment and then realizing that down the road, if people became isolated and don't have enough people, that needs to change how, they started their adoption or their relationship with that child as foster parents. And even for me, when I adopted, that's what I thought was right to do, like just being alone with my kids. And most of us get really burnt out and some of us become traumatized by it. So yeah, it's just changing even some of the guidelines that we thought were evidence-based before. And now we're like, okay, this needs to change. And again, this is only a 2 hours, presentation, but there's so much to learn on AFCCA. So, stay in touch. You can go on our YouTube page. There's a lot of videos. More will come out after our rebranding, and hopefully this is going to help, caregivers and professionals in their journey.
Thank you all so much. Again, if you didn't have a chance to be able to, did I cut you off, Tanya?
Nope. Go ahead.
So you were all open as I was talking. if you haven't had a chance or if a question hits you afterwards, I will make sure that everything is emailed to everybody so you know how to get a hold of us. Yeah, as we wrap things up, I do want to share again, the professionals are welcome to join the Adopt for Life community for free. You'll receive notifications of webinars like this one, as well as get access to other invaluable resources and supports. So I'll make sure that the registration link goes out via email to all of you. I also just want to send you a kind reminder to please take a few minutes to fill out the survey that's going to be popping up on your screen. It's really important for us to make sure that the content that we're providing you is useful, and giving us suggestions and getting that feedback really shapes the work that everyone does, especially on the AFCCA team. We want to encourage you to both follow and like our public Facebook page for information on ongoing events that we provide to families. So on behalf of everybody, especially with our amazing two presenters, I really appreciate you guys taking your time. Every time we do this, I learn something new. And I really appreciate all of you. Thank you guys for joining us. And hopefully you'll be seeing us soon for another webinar. There.
Keep spreading the word.
Yes. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.